What's the first thing you reach for when things get tough, when fear starts knocking or maybe the ground feels like it's shaking under your feet? That impulse to find safety, right? To seek refuge somewhere stable. It's just incredibly human, isn't it?
Absolutely. That deep-seated need for security, for a place to find lasting peace when you're faced with suffering. Yeah, everyone can relate to that.
And that very search for a secure refuge, well, that's the topic of our deep dive today. We're looking at a truly fascinating source, a sermon delivered way back in 1954.
By a highly respected Buddhist teacher.
Exactly. And this isn't just any talk on Buddhism. It's a really detailed exploration of where true, ultimate security can actually be found. It contrasts sort of everyday ideas of refuge with a very specific spiritual path.
Right. This source takes that fundamental question, where can we turn to genuinely free ourselves from suffering, and answers it with, honestly, surprising detail. It draws on ancient verses, describes a precise method of inner realization. It's quite something.
So our mission in this deep dive is to unpack this text for you. Think of it like you handed us this sermon and said, okay, help me understand what's most important here. What are the key insights?
Yeah, we want to explore its layers together.
Yeah.
From the foundational principles right through to its unique description of practice.
Helping you grasp what this teacher presented as the ultimate secure refuge.
We'll be your guides through the material, pointing out what's maybe conventional, but also, more importantly, what's quite distinct and, frankly, powerful in this teaching.
I'm really looking forward to digging into this because some of the ideas here are, well, pretty remarkable.
And I'm ready to help connect the dots, highlight the significance of this specific approach.
Okay, then, let's unpack this source. So the sermon kicks off by quoting and then translating some really powerful Pali verses. These are sort of the bedrock for everything that follows. So let's listen carefully. Recites Pali verses carefully. Bahuzo sarantha yanti pabatani vanani ka aramaro khachitani manosabayata jita neta kosaran ka kemaneta saran motame neta saran chamagama sabadukatamukati yo budhanya kahamya kasaganya sadakamina katari arisakani samapanyaya pasapi dukhara saran samapadayo dukasaka atikama Arianya katoige magadu kupasa magamino. Eta katarancha kama eta sarancha mutama. Eta sarancha magarumara sabaduka pamukatiti. And the text immediately gives the translation, laying out this fundamental contrast right from the get-go. It says, many people threatened by fear go for refuge to mountains, forests, parks, trees, and shrines. But then it quickly follows. This is not the secure refuge, not the supreme refuge. By resorting to that refuge, one is not free from all suffering. So a clear warning there, definitely. Then comes the alternative. But whoever has gone for refuge to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, and sees the Four Noble Truths with right understanding, that seeing part seems important.
Right.
Namely, suffering, the origin of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and the Noble Eightfold Path leading to the cessation of suffering.
Right.
This indeed is the secure refuge. This is the supreme refuge. By resorting to this refuge, one is freed from all suffering.
So the initial message is, well, crystal clear. There are places people instinctively turn to when they're afraid that thinking, physical locations, maybe objects of worship, things outside themselves.
You've got mountains, the trees.
Exactly. But according to this sermon, these are ultimately insecure. They might offer maybe temporary relief, but they can't cut through the root cause of suffering itself.
And the secure, the supreme refuge. That's taking refuge in the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. But like you said, there's that crucial qualifier, whoever sees the Four Noble Truths.
Precisely. It's not just about belief, not just reciting the words. This text puts a huge emphasis on seeing the truths. And that naturally leads the sermon to elaborate on what these truths actually are. It shifts from the Pali into what it calls the Siam language, or Thai, for a deeper explanation.
Right. So it defines the Four Noble Truths. Starting with the first truth, the kartu ko, suffering. And it gives a very direct definition, doesn't it? Birth is suffering, just flat out.
Right. Birth is presented as the fundamental entry point into suffering, and the origin of that suffering, is identified as tententum.
Craving.
Craving. This craving, according to the sermon, is the very thing that, drives rebirth. It keeps the cycle going.
And the text doesn't just leave it at a general definition of craving, does it? It actually breaks it down into 3 specific types.
It does. First, there's kamatencham kankatan.
Craving for sensual pleasures. So desire for nice sights, sounds, smells, tastes, physical feelings, the usual suspects.
Exactly. And the sermon paints this picture of how this particular craving fuels rebirth in, like the lower realms, the human realm we're in, and even the 6 levels of celestial beings.
Ugh.
And it highlights how much conflict and struggle, fighting and grabbing, arises directly from this desire for sensual stuff.
Okay, that makes sense. Then the second type.
That's pavatan chabom watan has. This is the craving for existence, or you could say craving for form.
Craving just to be.
In a way, yes. Craving for continued existence within the realms of form. And this is linked specifically to rebirth in the form realm, the Rupapava, which apparently has 16 levels.
16 levels.
And interestingly, the text associates this craving with actually attaining the form realm meditations, the first 4 jhanas tella.
That is interesting. So craving for existence itself, if channeled through meditation, can lead to these higher but still form-based realms.
Yeah.
But it's still driven by craving.
Still craving, still driving rebirth within samsara. And the third type is vibhavatan shawi watan hasa.
Craving for non-existence or annihilation. That sounds almost counterintuitive.
It does, doesn't it? But this is linked to rebirth in the formless realm, the Arupapava, which has 4 levels. And this is associated with achieving the formless realm meditations, Hanes 5 through 8.
Ah, the higher, more subtle meditations.
Exactly. But the sermon specifically warns here, this craving for non-existence, for cessation, can actually be mistaken for nirvana itself if you don't have the right understanding, the right vision.
So even wanting to just disappear can be a trap. A very subtle one.
A very subtle one, yeah. So the text is showing how craving in all its forms, even these very refined forms, just fuels different types of continued being, continued suffering, ultimately.
Yeah. So after defining suffering and its origin craving, it then names the third truth. Dohasa atekaman tuk kasa kastakami.
Which is the cessation, or the stepping beyond suffering, the end goal.
And finally, the fourth truth. Arinke wukan magaoriakatske kama kes.
The Noble Eightfold Path.
Right. The path, the way that leads to the cessation of suffering, leads to Nibbana Nippalempi. And it describes Nibbana as the place where suffering is pacified, where it finally ceases.
Now, what's absolutely crucial here, and what the sermon makes, well, really clear, is that simply understanding these truths intellectually.
Just knowing the list.
Yeah, just knowing the list, what it calls pariyati, the theoretical understanding, that's not enough. It's not going to liberate you.
Right.
The text explicitly transitions now. It moves to how one actually sees and realizes them experientially through practice.
Okay, and this is where the sermon really presents this map of the meditator's inner landscape that feels quite specific, maybe even unique to this tradition.
It is quite specific, yes.
Yep.
It introduces the concept of multiple kayas knuj, inner bodies, you could say, or perhaps dimensions of reality within a person.
Multiple bodies inside?
It describes a progression, starting from the physical human body we all know, then to a subtle human body, then a celestial body, a subtle celestial body, then form realm Brahma body, subtle form realm Brahma, formless realm Brahma, subtle formless realm Brahma.
Wow, that's a lot of layers.
It is. And finally, the ultimate body, the Dhammakaya Kazishtiyam, and its subtle form as well. It's presenting the self not as just one thing, but as these kind of nested levels of being or consciousness.
Okay, wow. So hang on. The Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, the secure refuge we talked about at the start, they're found within this inner landscape, residing in these inner kayas, especially the Dhammakaya.
Exactly. That's the core message here, according to this teaching. The secure refuge isn't something you find out there.
It's not a mountain or a shrine.
No. It's located within you, accessible through a very specific inner journey.
And this is where it gets really interesting, because the sermon states that the Four Noble Truths themselves are seen, not with your physical eyes, obviously, or even just with ordinary mental consciousness. It mentions kaṇḍa dois when...
Right, not just the everyday thinking mind.
They are seen with a special kind of inner knowledge or vision called Niya Jays. And this Niya belongs specifically to the Dhammakaya. It even describes this Niya visually, like a large luminous sphere surrounding the Dhammakaya.
This is a really key insight of this particular tradition. True understanding, true seeing isn't just intellectual analysis. It's a direct visual inner perception. And it's enabled by accessing this higher level of consciousness, the Dhammakaya.
Okay, so how does one actually access this inner vision, this niya? The sermon details a specific meditative path, right?
It does, very precisely.
It says the starting point is stopping. The word used is tunajut, stopping a mind precisely at the very center of an inner dharma sphere, dalangan dwashtam, that constitutes the human body.
Yes, the emphasis is really on that stillness, that precise stopping of thought and perception right at the center point.
Not just general mindfulness, but a very focused stopping.
Very focused. And this stopping, if done correctly, leads to seeing successive inner spheres. These spheres represent stages of the path. Sila sees virtue, samadhi sama sees concentration.
Ah, the factors of the path appearing visually.
Exactly. Then panya, panjasis, wisdom, vimutti, vimutti, liberation. And finally, vimutti niyadasana, vimutti is tatsana, the vision of liberation knowledge.
And the text keeps stressing the importance of stopping and centering at the center of the center. At each stage.
Yes, that refinement, going deeper and deeper into the center point, seems crucial for the progression.
It's describing a very visual internal progression through meditative states. And it links this directly to entering meditative absorption, the Ganhas descents.
Right. The text actually describes the Dhammakaya sitting on a jhāna sphere, and the practice involves moving through all 8 jhanas, as described in the standard scriptures. You enter each one from the center of the previous one, experiencing these states of increasing refinement and bliss.
And then reversing the process. It mentions Kidakabapina Nosapati Titaya.
Yes, going forwards and backwards through the jhanas, this mastery of jhana is presented as absolutely crucial for stabilizing the mind at these very deep inner levels, which then allows access to that higher vision, the jnana.
So the jhanas aren't just states of bliss. They're tools for accessing this specific inner sight.
That seems to be the implication here, yes.
Okay, so what is actually seen with this inner vision, this jnana of the Dhammakaya during this deep meditative practice?
This is key. The sermon says it sees the ayatanas, ashatana.
The origins.
The origins or the bases of beings in all the different realms of existence, from the lowest hells right up through the human celestial form and formless realms.
It sees where beings come from.
Essentially, yes. And importantly, it clearly sees how these origins are tied directly back to those 3 types of craving, the tanhas that we discussed earlier. Kamatanha, havatanha, vibhavatanha.
So seeing this direct inner perception of how craving fuels continued existence in all these different realms, that is the experiential realization of the origin of suffering, dukkha samuppada, according to this teaching.
Precisely. It's seeing the mechanism firsthand internally. You're not just thinking about craving. You're seeing its result, its function through this Dhammakaya vision.
Got it. So the path to liberation, the Magga, the Fourth Noble Truth, is this specific method, this stopping and progressing through the inner bodies, the spheres, the jhanas.
That's how it's presented. This inner journey is the method, the practice, patipani, for abandoning craving and ultimately reaching the cessation of suffering, nirodha.
So practice leads directly to realization.
Exactly. The text emphasizes that this practice leads to paicibda patiquista, which is the realization or attainment of the spiritual stages.
Like becoming a stream enterer, once returner.
Yes, non-returner, or arahant. According to the sermon, achieving these stages isn't just, a conceptual status or a result of good karma alone. It's the direct result of this seeing of the Four Noble Truths with the Dhammakaya.
Which is achieved by navigating these inner bodies and mastering the jhanas.
Specifically in relation to seeing the origins of suffering. The ayatana is linked to craving. In all the different realms corresponding to those inner bodies, it's all interconnected.
Okay, the sermon also mentions something called the 16 duties, tetatke, all the fours last had heed. How does that fit into this picture?
Right. The text explains this quite systematically. It refers to seeing the Four Noble Truths, suffering, origin, cessation, path, 4 truths,
Okay.
in relation to 4 distinct sets of inner bodies. The human and subtle human pair, the celestial and subtle celestial pair, the form realm Brahma and subtle form realm Brahma pair, and the formless realm Brahma and subtle formless realm Brahma pair.
4 sets of bodies.
Yes. So seeing all 4 truths through the specific niya or vision associated with each of those 4 levels of inner reality Well, 4 truths times 4 levels gives you 16 specific insights or realizations.
16 duties accomplished.
Exactly. And completing these 16 realizations, according to this text, is what culminates in achieving full arahantship and reaching Nibbana.
Wow. That's incredibly specific. This teaching really draws a sharp line, doesn't it, between just knowing about the truths intellectually
Big here.
and seeing them directly through this very particular involved practice.
It absolutely does. The sermon powerfully concludes this whole section by reiterating that vital distinction between theory, pariyatti, practice, papadi, and realization, paiveda.
Knowing, doing, and seeing.
In essence, yes. And it states, quite unequivocally, that according to the specific teaching, true spiritual progress, actual liberation from suffering, demands engaging with this specific inner practice to gain this direct experiential insight.
It's not optional.
Not if you want full liberation, according to this view. Otherwise, it says, one is described, using that Pali phrase again, old for nothing, bonhina masas kaunos. Yeah. Intellectual knowledge alone, no matter how vast or sophisticated, simply won't liberate you from suffering. You have to practice this way to see.
That's it. Well, a very strong and clear message. So wrapping this up a bit, what are the key takeaways from this deep dive into this specific sermon? What does this all mean for you, the listener, grappling with this?
Well, I think the first thing is that this text offers a remarkably detailed and perhaps for many a very unique roadmap to spiritual liberation.
Yeah, it goes way beyond, just external rituals or belief systems or even purely intellectual understanding.
It presents a very specific, almost verifiable inner journey. It's suggesting that the fundamental nature of suffering, its root cause, its cessation, and the actual path to freedom. These things are revealed not through external worship, not through philosophical debate,
but through a precise method of inner cultivation.
Exactly. Inner cultivation and direct visual realization that seeing with the Nyaya achieved through this specific meditation practice that accesses these inner bodies.
It fundamentally redefines where that secure refuge is actually found. It's not just in the abstract concepts of Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, or historical figures.
No, it locates them within the practitioner's own deepest inner reality, within the Dhammakaya. And they're accessible only through this specific inner path.
So it really challenges maybe more conventional ideas about how spiritual progress is made. It roots it firmly in personal inner transformation and the realization of the Four Noble Truths through this very specific method.
Absolutely. It's a very practice-oriented, results-oriented perspective.
Okay, so just to recap, we've taken a deep dive into this unique 1954 sermon focused on refuge. We saw that initial contrast it drew between, well, worldly, ultimately insecure refuges.
Mountains, forests.
Right. And the truly secure refuge found in the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, but defined very specifically by seeing the Four Noble Truths.
And we explored the sermon's incredibly detailed account of how this seeing actually happens in practice.
Yeah, involving those specific inner bodies, those nested levels of reality.
The function of that unique inner vision called nala.
The precise meditative steps.
Yeah.
Stopping the mind, progressing through inner spheres, and mastering the jhanas.
And how all of that culminates in the realization, the paiveda, that comes from seeing the root of suffering, craving, in relation to all these different levels of inner being.
And the sermon's conclusion really just echoes those opening verses, doesn't it? It leaves us with that clear, emphatic statement that only by taking refuge in this specific way, by seeing the truths through this described inner path, can one truly escape all suffering. It repeats that final verse.
This is the secure refuge. This is the supreme refuge. By resorting to this refuge, one is freed from all suffering.
It's a very strong assertion that true security, true freedom, is an inside job, achieved through a very specific internal process laid out here.
It really is.
So maybe for a final provocative thought to leave you with, the listener. This sermon presents liberation not just as, say, a state of mind or conceptual understanding, but as a form of direct seeing. And it's achieved through what sounds like a specific, internal, almost anatomical process involving inner bodies and visions.
It's a very distinct model.
It is.
Yes.
So how does this perspective where spiritual reality is accessed and seen in this precise, detailed, almost visual way, how does that challenge or maybe align with your own current understanding of meditation, spiritual practice, and the path to freedom from suffering?
It certainly gives you a lot to contemplate, doesn't it, about the nature of realization itself and the methods to get there.
It really does. Well, thank you for sharing this fascinating source with us and for joining us on this deep dive.
Our pleasure.
We hope it's illuminated this unique perspective and given you plenty to think about and maybe even explore further on your own.